Yes, sir.
So I guess we better get started. I certainly want to welcome all of you to the Regional Commission meeting for this month of February. I started to say warm month, but I guess it's just a few warm days. So I would like to call the meeting to order, and we will start with the statement that Vice Chair Phil North has for us. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mayor. Pursuant to the City of Roanoke emergency ordinance adopted by the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Regional Commission on April 23rd, 2020, and the 2020 Virginia General Assembly Legislation H-29 enacted April 24th, 2020, the February meeting of the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Regional Commission is being held virtually on Thursday, February 25th, 2021 at 3 p.m. via Zoom. Under the current state of emergency and until further notice, it has been deemed unsafe to assemble a quorum of a public body in one place. Any members of the public may view and participate in the meeting through electronic means. Meeting details are listed on the second page of the agenda. All materials made available to the members will be made available to the public at the same time by posting on the RVARC website. This meeting is being recorded as always. Due to the virtual nature, video and audio will be recorded and provided on the website in place of written minutes. When the state of emergency ends, draft minutes from all of the meetings held during this time will be ratified at the next in-person meeting. As a way of ensuring that our meeting goes smoothly, Brian Hill, RVARC Regional Planner, will serve as the host for this meeting. All participants are asked to mute themselves to improve audio quality. If any voting commission member wishes to make a motion, second it, or comment on a motion, please unmute yourself and ask to be recognized by our chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. We certainly appreciate that. And Wayne, if you would call the roll, please.
Yes, sir. Ms. Cox, Mr. Lanford,
Yes, sir.
Ms. Vannersdal,
Yes, I'm present.
Mr. Clinton,
Here.
Ms. Henderson, Ms. LaRue, Mr. Martin, Billy Martin. Mr. Martin had some issues at the TPO meeting. The microphone went off in his laptop, and I don't know if he ever got it corrected or not, but he's not with us as yet. Mr. Collins, Mr. Spence, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Carter, Mr. Whitlow.
Present.
Mr. Inslow, Ms. Smith,
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell,
Here.
Mr. Hutchins, Mr. Dean Martin,
Here.
Mr. Radford,
Here.
Mr. North,
Here.
Mr. Osborne, Lee Osborne. Miss Onitis is not with us. She has had a conflict. Mr. Tucker,
Here.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Here.
Miss Moon Reynolds,
Here.
Dr. Stanko Downey,
Good afternoon. Here.
Mr. Jeffrey,
Here.
Mr. Guzzler, Mr.
Here.
Guzzler,
Here.
Mr. Vollison, Mr. Wallace,
Present.
Mr. Saunders. Okay. And Mr. Saunders, was he here? I know Mr. Wallace was here. Okay. Miss King,
Here.
Mayor Marshall.
Well,
Good evening. I'm here.
thank you. So I will check on that and get an email to you real quick. All right. All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. Mr. Irvin,
Here.
Mr. Newbill, Mayor Gross,
Here.
Mr. Peters.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Next item is our consent agenda. And today it contains just 3 items. Of course, approval of the agenda, the minutes from the January 28th meeting, as well as the financial report. And of course, that's for ending January 31, 2021. Are there any additions or corrections to the consent agenda? Hearing none, we will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Who made the motion? I'm sorry.
Lee Osborne,
Okay, and who
who
seconded
also
it?
is present.
Who is that?
Bill Bestfitch, second.
No, okay. Thank you.
All
I
right.
noticed that Mr. Vollison's joined us, so I'll say that he's here.
Good. Good,
Yes,
good.
I'm here. Thanks.
So I'll call the roll.
Yes.
If I don't call your name, please let me know. Mr. Lanford,
Yes.
Ms. Vandersdahl,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton,
Here.
and I still don't think Mr. Martin, Bailey Martin's made it yet. Mr. Whitlow,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mr. Dean Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Osborne,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
Mr. Bestfitch,
Yes.
Ms. Moon Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Stanko Downey, Dr. Stanko Downey, she was here. Okay. Mr. Jeffrey,
Yes.
Mr. Gessler,
Yes.
Mr. Vollison,
Yes.
Mr. Wallace,
Aye.
Ms. King,
Aye.
Yes.
Ms. Mayor Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Aye.
Mayor Gross,
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you for that. As you mentioned, the motion does carry. Have just a few remarks this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to remind the members of the work program committee that we will have a brief meeting of the committee following the conclusion of the regional commission meeting this afternoon. And again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for serving on that very important committee. I also want to recognize the efforts of Roanoke County in implementing its 419 plan. They're working with developers to expand services at Tanglewood and thereby attracting some nationally known restaurants. So congratulations on that. It's always good to have restaurants. I love them. And I would like to just briefly take a minute to thank some folks. I certainly want to thank the staff. They continue to do a great job under some unusual and difficult circumstances. And personally, I think it's one of Wayne's greater achievements to assemble and maintain the staff that he's had over the years. So they're obviously very important to us. Also, I'd like to thank each and every one of you folks for attending. I know we all have a lot going on, and it seems as though these days it's a little more difficult to get anything done. So appreciate you, sincerely appreciate you taking time out this afternoon, and certainly appreciate your support of this organization. And Phil, before I forget it, I also want to thank you for filling in last month. I was definitely under the weather, so I appreciate it. You doing the chair position.
You're welcome.
And with that, we will move on to the executive director's report. Wayne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see a Botetourt iPad. I'm not sure who that is. I don't know if it's Mr. Martin or not. So I guess we'll continue on.
Okay.
I just had a few things to cover. I mentioned this to the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization, but I think it's important for Virginia as a whole, but also for our region that, as the Census Bureau has taken the census, and in the process of releasing, we'll be releasing the numbers, I guess, in the next few months. But they're making some changes to the definition. They want to redefine how they classify a metropolitan area. And that may not have an impact on us, but it will affect 6 other metropolitan areas and several in southwestern or western Virginia. But also the urban area is being redefined. It used to be that you had a population of 2,500. Now they're jumping that that criteria up to 4,000 or 5,000 people in terms of density. So that may affect our urbanized area of Roanoke sometime, and that wouldn't have an implication necessarily on the commission, but it could affect the transportation planning organization boundaries. The second thing, I know that we've done a number of housing studies in the region. We just completed, of course, the Roanoke, Franklin County, Roanoke City, Salem housing study, and we're reporting on to boards and other groups about that study. But I just found out that the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission is now looking at examining issues related to affordable housing in the Commonwealth. And they're going to be having some discussion, and we'll be going around talking with a number of communities and regions about affordable housing. And at the same time, Housing Virginia, which is a branch of, that promotes housing issues in the state, is looking at beginning a housing initiative in Virginia, and we'll keep you informed about what that initiative entails and if it has some funding attached to it, which is always a good thing if you're looking at developing housing. And finally, I'm very pleased to let you know that after working on this for almost a decade, we were contacted by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. We have been getting some funding from EDA to do our SEDS. And as you know, Eddie Wells is the project leader on developing our comprehensive economic development strategy for the region. We were just contacted in that we don't have to make application year to year from now on. They want to put us in what they call their partnership planning group, which are all the economic development districts, essentially PDCs, that have met some criteria and now are allowed to have one application that will cover their funding over a 3-year period. So we're very pleased about that. And so that also might make us available for funding coming out of the administration's new stimulus package, because the last time they had a stimulus package, all the existing planning partnerships in Virginia got $400,000 without having to make a match on it. So they were using that for all kinds of COVID-related projects and so forth. We were not eligible for that because we weren't in that partnership group, but maybe with the new stimulus package, we will be eligible. And we'll keep you abreast of how that is going forward. So, and I want to say how much I appreciate Eddie Wells, who's our Director of Community Development, staying on top of the applications and the monitoring and getting, the recognition that we have to move forward as a planning partner for the Economic Development Administration. I don't have any other things, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there are any questions.
Okay. I don't hear any questions. So Wayne, thank you very much. We appreciate that information. And with that, we will move on to the next item. And I think Lee Osborne joined us late, but I'm glad you are here, Lee, because we need to consider the restructuring committee report. So if you have any comments you'd like to make on that, please, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, this material begins on page 21 in your packet. And I'm trusting or hoping that everyone has actually read this report, because we consider this at some length. I think this report is a little bit more detailed than what was presented last time, but there's no real changes to it. When we completed our discussion last month, we asked, because this requires unanimous approval of all members, we asked you all to go back and consult with your elected officials, governing bodies, chief administrative officers, to see if there were any concerns that anyone had with the provisions. And the only thing that I'm going to point out that has been added in here, we did get, Wayne said, we did get some feedback, I believe, from Franklin County, to be sure to maybe consider clarifying how we were using the term population, or how that would be defined. So if you look on page 28, while I don't know that this is referenced specifically in the report, there is a definition of population for purposes of applying our membership requirements or our membership provisions here that we're adjusting. So I wanted to be sure to point that out to you. The other language is largely in the text of the report and is consistent with what we discussed before. So before I go any further, I'm going to ask if anyone has any comments, questions, or concerns that have arisen during the last month since our last meeting that they want to ask or share with the group. Okay. Not hearing any, I'll move on to finish up my report. I think the last question that we had not answered was the timing of this change, and whether it would occur effective with the next fiscal year, a year after that, or 2 years after that, or whether we would have some sort of a transition provision so that we wouldn't be in a situation where people who were currently serving a term, their term might be.
Unmute.
I'm muted. I'm not muted.
No.
Hey, I'm sorry. I was testing mine. I was talking to somebody else, and hallelujah, it came on. Sorry about that, Lee.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, Matt, that did it.
And in discussing that, and I think Wayne and Jeremy did spend some time looking at this, and our committee shared emails about this, Bill and Phil and Billy. And we believe that if we make this change effective a year from now, June 1st or July 1st, in other words, July 1st of 2022, then largely through natural attrition, the localities will be able to adjust their memberships so that when terms come up for renewal, they can make decisions. This largely, I mean, this shouldn't really affect the 6 smaller jurisdictions that are members. It's going to affect the 7 larger ones in the sense that each of them is dropping 1 or 2 members from their current contingency. So that's what we are proposing. And so I think that would have to be part of the recommendation and motion of the committee, is that this would take effect. These changes would take effect July 1st of 2022. Mr. Chairman, if there are no questions, that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, sir. We appreciate that. And Lee, did I hear in there that you've made a motion to approve the committee report?
Yes, sir.
James Urban, Rocky Mount, make a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any further questions or discussion? All right, if there are no further questions, we will call the roll, please. Wayne?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Steve Clinton here. I have a one of those things we all love, an 11th hour question for Mr. Osborne, and this is, there's no page numbers, but this is under representation of the committee, and I'm looking to see where it is. I just noticed this as I was signing on to the meeting this afternoon. Let me see. Following this draft charter language to reflect the recommended change. Let me see if I can reconstruct this. It's something I'm sure we've covered, but Membership of the commission shall be composed of representatives of the member governmental subdivisions on the basis of 2 members from each subdivision. Okay. At least one of whom is an elected member. So it could be 2 of them. Both of them could be elected, I think. So then in addition, each governmental subdivision with population in excess of 25K and less than 50K shall appoint 1 additional member who must be an elected official. So doesn't that mean that it's possible that a subdivision could have 3 elected officials on the commission, which would violate, I think, probably FOIA in some respects, but nonetheless, we really want to have 3 elected officials from 1 government subdivision on the commission.
Well, I think our position was that that's up to each local government. We have to have a majority of the commission as a whole. And so we were trying to draft this to do 2 things. And part of the reason for keeping a minimum of 2 representatives from each member government was to allow for an elected official to be one of those members, and potentially a chief administrative officer who is not an elected official, and so really falls under the category of a citizen member to also be a representative if the locality chose to do that. The flexibility that we've provided is that it's really up to the local government. So I would assume that a local government, if appointing 3 people, and that was their delegation, would create a FOIA issue, that they would not do that. But we weren't telling them. I mean, if you have other local governments, such as the city of Roanoke, that currently has 4 representatives or 3 representatives who are elected officials, and as well as Roanoke County has 3 elected officials who are representatives. But that's 50% of their delegation. And so is your question or concern, should we change this to require that there be a citizen representative? Is that the question?
I'm nervous about the language, at least one of whom is an elected member.
Well, yeah, we consciously worded it that way because we didn't want to basically dictate to each locality. If a locality wanted to have 2 elected officials representing that locality, and that was all their representation, then we didn't want to tell them they couldn't do that.
Okay, and then if it goes over to the next increment of population consideration, they could have 3, like you say Roanoke County does, and we've duly considered that and determined it to be okay, but up to the local government, right? That was the position.
Yes. Right now, Roanoke County has 3 of their 6, and they're required to have 3 of their 6.
Yeah. Something like Pontotoc could have 3 of their 3, be 100%.
Right.
The code
And
of
some
Virginia
governments have 5 members, so they would have to follow 5.
They would what?
Some localities. That's weird. Some localities have. All right, I'll give up.
The bug is loose out your mouth.
Well, we need to, if you're not on mute, you might want to mute yourself unless you have and something to bring up. But what Mr. Irvin was saying, you have 5 representatives, you have 5 elected officials on your governing body. Is that, and
Right, and so just 2 would create a FOIA issue.
Yes.
I think the intent of what is submitted is that if they go that route, it is the responsibility of the local government to duly notice that as a meeting if required. But that our job isn't to roll all that into bylaws, but to allow them to be flexible in their membership so long as they manage any notice requirements that triggers.
yes, sir. And other planning districts or regional commissions in Virginia, they have all of their members are elected officials, but they only have 2. they don't have as many as we do. And that was one of the concerns when we looked at this, because the way the current membership reads is one, like for instance, the city of Roanoke is very close to approaching 100,000. And if they go over 100,000, that means we have to have the majority of their council members on our board. And that, I think that just was a bit, it's hard because all the council and board members, you guys have you people have all these things that you do. And this is just tried to kind of focus it better on just a couple of elected officials from the governing, and it is the governing body. It has to be someone from the governing body, the board or the city or town council.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, for the purposes of my question, I'm okay. I just wanted to make sure that was duly considered, and I understand what we're saying, that each local government would have to consider the consequences of having 3 of their 3 members, for example, in Botetourt's case, elected, and whatever the FOIA implications would be. We're leaving that up to the locality, and that's fine as long as we've considered it and are aware of it. I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Mr. Clinton. We appreciate the questions. Good discussion, so thank you for that. Any other questions or discussion? No? Okay, Wayne, if you would call roll, please.
And Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, we're adopting the length of the report and the membership, the population, which we clarified about where that information comes from, and the fact that we're allowing alternates for elected officials, and an alternate for elected official has to be another elected official from the governing body, but you can also have alternates for, I guess, citizen members as well. But I think the concern was mainly for elected officials. But you have to declare that board or council has to declare who the alternate is, because they will receive all the information that the commission sends out, and will also maybe represent that person who can't make it and the alternate would represent them on committees and other things like that. And the third thing, of course, we're deciding on is this will go into effect July 1st, 2022.
Right.
We have 11 members that are up for consideration for renewal in 2022 on July 1st. So that will give the local government some time to determine, as Mr. Osborne said, how they want to handle, eliminating some of their members if they need to. All right.
Absolutely.
Mr. Lanford.
Yes.
Ms. Vanderstal. Ms. Vanderstal.
Yes, sorry, I muted myself.
Okay. Mr. Billy Martin. Mr. Billy Martin. All right. Mr. Whitlow.
Yes.
Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes.
Mr. Martin, Dean Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Radford.
Yes.
Mr. North.
Yes.
Mr. Osborne.
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch.
Aye.
Miss Moon Reynolds.
Aye.
Dr. Stanko Downey.
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey.
Yes.
Mr. Gessler.
Yes.
Mr. Volazin.
No.
Mr. Wallace.
Aye.
Miss King.
Yes.
Mayor Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Irvin.
Aye.
Mayor Gross.
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
The motion passes, Mr. Chairman, and just as a reminder, this has to be approved by all 11 governments. So if you need a sample resolution or something to get onto your council or board, please let us know.
Mr.
Wayne,
Strickland,
Mr. Chairman, I would just request that you send a sample out to all the local governments.
I will.
Exactly.
We like less work.
I love it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Billy, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, sir,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, I'd vote yes on that motion you just had. I was
Okay.
on mute again.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, this is the other Botetourt representative. I don't think I was called on that roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Steve Clinton, yes.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank-
Clinton. All right. Any others?
Mr. Chairman, the other benefit of sending out a standard resolution is to make sure that everything that is encompassed in this is actually approved, because it's not a simple change, I don't think.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, this is Chris from Franklin County. I would echo Dan O'Donnell's request for that standard resolution. But then also some of the reports that were sent that may be helpful to us as the administrators, if they could be sent electronically as we do our board reports to accompany the resolution to explain the reorganization, if you will, of the commission.
Right. 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 Good thought. Good thought. And I do think it's important that that's a standard standard resolution, and that everyone has the same information. But that's a good thought, Chris. We can send it out electronically. I think we can do that, right, Wayne?
Mr. Chairman, we'll send out the sample resolution. We'll send out a copy of the report of the restructuring committee, and we'll send out a copy of the charter with X'd out the place, the wording that's going to be changed, and the other wording replaced. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we
Red
can
line.
do that. Yes.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Any other requests along those lines? No? Okay, well, thank you, folks. Appreciate that. And we will move along to the discussion concerning community development block grant priorities. Mr. Eddie Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Eddie.
On page 33 of your agenda package, there's a staff report relating to the 2021 Community Development Block Grant priorities for the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany Regional Commission. This is something that the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development asks us to do each year. We survey the localities to find out what their priorities are for the Community Development Block Grant Program. This mostly deals with the localities that are eligible for the competitive program. I know that the City of Roanoke already receives an annual allocation of CDBG funds, so it doesn't impact the city. It also doesn't impact Franklin County and Rocky Mount. Franklin County and Rocky Mount priorities are set by the West Piedmont Planning District Commission, our sister organization of Martinsville. While I'm presenting this, I did want to ask Clifton Forge. I know that I attended an online public hearing for the town of Clifton Forge Tuesday night. I know they are in the middle of sort of deciding on what they're going to apply for CDBG funds this year. These rankings do have an impact on their scoring. I see that Mayor Marshall is on the line today, and also town manager, Mr. Unroe. And I wanted to make sure that we have at least a description of any project that they may be submitting next month. And also to make sure that that project type is in the priority 1 grouping. I think my understanding right now is that project may be a housing rehab project, but I'm not sure of that. I think at the public hearing the other night, they were still sort of discussing general CDBG needs. So if Mayor Marshall or Mr. Unroe can sort of chime in on that before we take any action on this.
This is Chuck Unroe, town manager, and one of the things that we were talking about is a housing neighborhood grant, like you mentioned, and then we're also in the process of working on some infrastructure repairs and upgrades that I was under the impression you already had documentation on that to have on your information. But
Okay.
if not, I'll be happy to forward that to you as soon as the meeting is over.
Okay. So I guess that would move, I guess I would request that we move the housing rehabilitation item from priority 2 up to priority 1 for this year, and move the economic development business district revitalization down to priority 2. Now, currently, right now, the city of Covington has a planning grant for downtown revitalization project, but they're not going to be submitting a construction grant for that until next year. So this should not impact anything they're doing this year. If that makes sense. So we'll
And Eddie,
move
does the town of Vinton, they've already submitted their application, right?
my understanding from, I talked with Pete Peters about that. He informed me that the town of Vinton submitted, and there was, DHCD was fortunate to have a second round of funding available last November due to some additional funds that they received, COVID related and some other things. And Mr. Peters had stated that the town had submitted their application to that fall or November round of competition. And that was a housing, I believe that was a housing rehab project also. So.
We limited as to how many categories we can have in each priority level?
We're only allowed to have 3 in each priority level. DHCD has a little unusual that they combined some of the categories a few years ago. As you can see, we've got 3 slots in 3 different priority categories, but only 5 project types. So I can't imagine that anybody would use that 3rd priority type. So, we want our localities to at least get these 50 and 30 points whenever they can. I mean, we don't want to take any, we don't want our actions to have a negative impact on anybody else's application. Let's put it that way. So this is an easy 50 points for Clifton Forge's project that will go in for housing. And I know City of Covington is submitting their, as far as I know, still submitting their Jackson Street neighborhood project, which is comprehensive community development, I believe. So those will go in. So 2 projects going in. And we move the housing rehab up to priority 1 and the business district revitalization down to priority 2.
And Eddie, we have no projects in that category.
No, not this year. Not at this time. No.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions for Eddie? Any further discussion? Okay, folks, you have before you the list of priorities as described by Mr. Wells. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Motion to approve.
All right.
Who is that?
Councilmember Stephanie Moon Reynolds move for approval of the 2021 CDBG priorities.
Thank you, ma'am. And second, was that?
I'll
Mr.
second,
Oz-
Mr.
oh,
Chairman, Billy Martin.
Mr. Martin, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Call the roll, please, Wayne.
Mr. Lanford,
Yes.
Ms. Vandersdahl,
Yes.
Mr. Clinton.
Yes.
I think after what Mr. Clinton, I missed him last time. I should put my glasses on, I guess. Okay, I got it now. Mr. Billy Martin,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Whitlow,
Mr. Chairman, as Franklin County is a part of the West Piedmont SEDS district, I will abstain.
thank you. Ms. Smith,
I abstain as well for the same rationale, Wayne.
thank you. Mr. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mr. Dean Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Radford,
Yes.
Mr. North,
Yes.
Mr. Osborne,
Yes.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
Mr. Bestpitch,
Aye.
Miss Moon Reynolds,
Aye.
Dr. Stanko Downey,
Yes.
Mr. Jeffrey,
Yes.
Mr. Guzzler,
Yes.
Mr. Volleson,
Yes.
Mr. Wallace,
Aye.
Miss King,
Yes.
Mayor Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin.
The town of Rocky Mount abstains, though I hope perhaps in the year or so to come, we will be part of your official planning. We shall see.
Thank you. Mayor Gross,
Yes.
Mr. Peters.
Yes.
The motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that, folks. And with that, we'll move on to the next order of business concerning the smart scale. And I think Mr. Hill has some information for us.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll
Yes,
share
sir.
my screen here and we'll talk a little bit about smart scale. Okay. As many of you already know, we've heard a couple of preliminary scenarios from round 4 of the FY22 round of the smart scale, which is the 4 rounds into it. I keep saying it's the new way that projects are selected for the 6-year improvement program, but we've got a few years under our belt. So here's just a few statistics from applications. 406 applications submitted statewide. 7 were screened out that did not meet the eligibility requirements. It shows you how much 199 million in the request amount for those screened out, 205 million in total cost. 2 were withdrawn. 397 applications were scored, which total cost of about 7.8 billion and 6.3 smart scale requests respectively. So this is a breakdown of the by construction district of the types of district grant program funding. What we see here under the second column, the district grant program funding, for Salem district, that was 41.6 million. Well, if you look at the third column, the supplemental DGPs, it's the supplemental district grant program funding, and that is the localities that apply for smart scale funding are eligible for those DGP funds. The MPOs and the PDCs are not. They are just eligible for applying for the high priority funds, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when you add the 63.8 million, which is roughly about 150% increase, and that's as a result of the statutory regional gas tax, that bumps up the DGP amount for this round to 105 million for Salem district. So that was, and as we'll see with some of the projects here, that was the reason why I think we and other localities and regions did so well. Just kind of breaking it further, talking about district grant funds and high priority funds. There's 3 steps, and I won't get too into the weeds of this, but statewide there was 156 funded projects of the 397, I believe I mentioned earlier. Of those, 29% were in the Salem district, and 17 of those 29 from the Salem district were from our region, the Roanoke Valley-Alleghany region. So the way this, just to kind of briefly summarize, the way these 3 steps work is that the first step is that they look at all applications that are eligible to to receive district grant funds. So that that's essentially localities. Then they look at and then they fund that until those DGP funds essentially run out. Then they look at step 2, the high priority funding for those applications that would have received district grant funds but weren't eligible. So, for example, the applications that were funded from the RVTPO and the RVARC, because they're not eligible for the district grant funds, they got those high priority funds. So they were added in step 2, and then in step 3 is and the kind of the caveat for step 2, those projects with the high priority in step 2, they cannot have an ask, if you will, a smart scale ask of more than the total allocated district grant funds. So you couldn't ask for more than what I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. So then step 3 is I guess sort of the remainder, the really big projects, the ones that are left over statewide that compete then for the remainder of the high priority funding. So let's take a look at what we're planning to receive in terms of funding here. 17 of 26 projects in this list here in the region are slated to be funded. That's for a total of $87.5 million. And I'll point to the project in green highlighted, and that as a result of a scoring error in the first round of the first scenario that came out in January, the folks at the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment had to kind of go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and reevaluate those all the projects based on the error. So as a result, there were 15 projects that previously were not funded, and now in this scenario are funded, and conversely 9 which were and are not. One good thing is that of those 9 that were not, there was none in our region, but one project in green, the roadway improvements to Route 220 and Knapp Road in Franklin County, was one of the 15 that did actually benefit from this error and was funded. Let's see. I guess just maybe a word or two.
Brian? Brian?
Yes.
This is what I had a question.
Yeah.
Do we have this? Did the Allegheny Highlands communities, did they request any smart scale funding?
Yes. In the you'll see the second. The third and the fourth projects on this list. Came from Covington, the Paper Trail Pedestrian Bridge, and the East Madison sidewalk improvements. Those were resubmittals from a previous round, and they have not been selected for funding. And that is the only. Those are the only localities from the Highlands and the Stanton district that submitted this round.
Thank you.
And then I guess another thing to point out here in this round, and of course the city of Roanoke and Roanoke County and Botetourt County are all aware that through the 460 arterial preservation program and arterial preservation plan, there were several projects that were applied for and as a result funded for various different projects along 460. So there were 8 applications overall in the region, and 6 of those were funded. So we think that's a really good percentage, and overall here we've got a 65% success rate throughout the entire region. Just a couple of observations here. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the supplemental DGB funding really was, I think, one of the big reasons why we had more money, and there were really good projects this round, and that seems to be, in a good way, continuing in an upward trend each round. So we're finding that there are smaller projects. 112 of the 150 were had project costs of less than $10 million. That tends to really drive the cost benefit score up. And then the other thing that we've noticed in the previous rounds was that there were really some big ticket projects. Notably in the last round was the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project, which was over $200 million. That's not the case this round. There were the two highest projects statewide were both right around 50 million each. So that, I think, has some bearing on the ability for more projects to obviously get money. So we'll talk a bit about the timeline for until June when the CTB adopts the 6-year program. So right now, obviously, this has been the second revision to the staff-funded transportation secretariat staff-funded scenario. So we may hear some and see some shifting between now and April. April to May, you all will and all of us will hear about the public hearings on those scenarios, and then any potential revisions. Hopefully a final draft in May at their CTB meeting, and then of course June and possibly I think the adoption there in May, and then the adoption of the 6-year improvement program in June. So that's all I have. Any big questions?
Yeah, just Mr. Chair, I have a question or a statement. Brian,
Sure.
good report, great success story. Thanks to our relationships with the CTB and VDOT and the Commission's efforts and support in leveraging funds. We've had these successes, but let me just point out, it's something you pointed out to reaffirm it. Because there wasn't that big project, or as we call it, the huge costly $200 million project at Hampton Roads, and because some of the recordation funds were used from all the counties in the state towards that project, I believe. And by the way, I hope that the budget committees and the General Assembly return the recordation tax funds to the counties going forward. We fared very well. Now, let me just say to you this. Since round 3 and now round 4, there is a Central Virginia taxing authority, or if you will, help me, Wayne, a commission, I guess it is, that's been formed.
Transportation Authority, very similar to Hampton Roads. Yes, sir.
Transportation Authority that's been formed, and that Central Virginia Transportation Authority includes the city of Richmond. And if you notice on there, the city of Richmond had just about the same, maybe a little more, maybe a little less than what we did. And so with that said, they now will be competing using not only smart scale funds, but they are going to be able to in the future leverage more to bring down the needed smart scale, which will build up probably a higher score. My point is this, from what I can tell, we are the last of the great areas or territories, if you will, in the great Commonwealth that doesn't have a taxing authority. Now, I'm not suggesting we go out and get one next year or two, because all that requires General Assembly approvals. But as we move on into the future, the demand for improved infrastructure are going to be greater. And so are traffic improvements that we haven't even dreamed of yet, as well as other projects, greenways, blueways, whatever. So as long as we don't have these big projects, we'll be able to still move along and have some great successes, I hope. But at some point in time, we may be faced with that choice. Do we need a taxing authority to leverage even more dollars to make what we're using today go further and accomplish more? And it's just something I want to lay on the table for people to be thinking about, because it's transportation begets economic development, and economic development begets transportation improvements, and it affects everything from housing to businesses, attracting big companies like Amazon and so forth. So one of the projects that we did not get this year that was aimed towards improved safety was that Botetourt, Roanoke County, Roanoke City effort at 460 and 220, $28 million project. Hopefully we'll work on that and resubmit it again in the future, but was exit 2 at 581 and Peters Creek Road, which was aimed for improvements to help market Woodhaven. And so that's one we'll have to revisit as well. All in all, though, my point is it was a good result this year, but that doesn't mean that going forward, we'll have those same successes unless we give good attention to what other needs we have in the area. Would like to have even more. I'd like to see 10 to 15 projects submitted from this area, if possible, using not only the individual governments' number of choices, but also the STPG money from the Allegheny Regional Commission, as well as the TPO, and the more the merrier. So just my 2 cents on the subject of transportation. Thank you.
Bill, may I ask a question? This is Lori Smith from Franklin County.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. If we were to get taxing authority, would that have an adverse impact on our competitiveness for Smart Scale or CDBG?
I can't tell you that it's going to have an adverse effect. I can tell you this, that I believe that we'll have more dollars to leverage projects in the future. In other words, we'd have another revenue source to leverage more projects in the future. So to that point, I would say it would help us. Now, Ken King's not on here. Ken King could probably give you the pros and cons of both. Yes, it would, and maybe it won't, but that's my take on it. And it's going to be a challenge going forward, because Smart Scale is only $800 million, I think it is. And eventually, it could be challenged with funds going to Northern Virginia to Metro. And my point is this: the pot wasn't as big for round 4 as it was, I think, for round 3. So I hope that the pot stays the same and doesn't go down when we get to round 5 in about 18 more months.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on Ms. Smith's question? Mr. North is right. I mean, to have that revenue stream, we're not, I clearly understand we're not as big as Hampton Roads, and they generate $250 million. And with that $250 million, they go out in the bond issuance for, for $4 to $6 billion. That's how they're redoing all the Hampton Roads Bridge, the bridge tunnel there, and they're improving 664, and they're making changes.
They told me yesterday.
Some of the other things. and about Ms. Smith had a really good point. Back in the good old days, if you made money, if you allowed yourself to tax yourself or to generate revenue, the General Assembly might say, well, we don't care about, look, they can take care of themselves. Well, theoretically, that's not the way that Smart Scale works. You're not supposed to have General Assembly members wandering in there, talking about projects, his or her favorite project. It's supposed to be all driven by special criteria and, based on formulas. So theoretically, it's not supposed to work that way. But as you saw from Brian's presentation, Hampton Road's still got $50 million, so, but we're hoping that that's if what Mr. North is proposing were to go through, this area could theoretically generate 15, if they had just a penny tax on the sales tax, could generate $15 to $20 million a year.
Yeah, and that point, and Wayne, let me just say to you this, the sales tax legislation to help school construction funding lost in its march onward and upward this year with the Isle of Wight bill, where you could add up to 1% on a referendum for specific school projects. And the state said that they need to revisit this whole issue with the schools to come up with improved funding, which tells me that they could be looking towards an increased sales tax. For example, in Roanoke County, it's 5.3%. We get 1%, they get 4.3%. My point is that the states figured out maybe they need to get some of the revenue stream, and perhaps they could be thinking of a revised taxing structure that could provide more money for schools. Also, transportation comes into play on this as well. So I'm just raising the issue out there because we all need to be watching what's going on down in Richmond, talking to our local delegates and whatnot, because it's something that we should seek to understand as much as we can. And maybe one day we'll decide we don't need it. Maybe one day we'll decide we might need it. But whoever gets to the finish line first with the request gets the golden revenue stream. And so I'm not advocating we should turn up the taxing authority on our citizens, but I am telling you this, that, just as Southwest Virginia challenges with school construction, so does it to some extent with transportation funding. And so just keep your eyes and ears open, folks. And when you're meeting with your local delegates, question them, challenge them, see what their temperature is in the room too, because they know things that we're not even talking about that go on down in Richmond that come into play on this. So,
Mr. Chairman, this is Dan. Wayne, how many authorities are there in the state now?
Well, there are actually a number of them, but a good number of them are public transportation authorities, Charlottesville and all those. And what I think Mr. North is aiming at, there are only 3. That's Hampton Roads, well, maybe 4. Hampton Roads, Northern Virginia, Richmond. That's 3. Yeah, right. And there's 4.
Well, I think, just one more. The point I'm making or getting towards making is that the big urban areas have this matching funds that leverage more state money. And without thinking about this, it's potential that the rural areas stay behind. And I'm calling us a rural area, which we're sort of not. But anyway, just a point to think about.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to add on to Mr. O'Donnell's statement, Lynchburg, Virginia is included in the Central Virginia Taxing Authority that includes Richmond. They're only 50 miles away. They're our neighbors. And so it's a lot closer than you might realize. So when you say the Richmond Taxing Authority, it's really the Central Virginia Taxing Authority, and it's not 100 miles, 180 miles away or 100 miles, it's 50 miles away. And that's where so Lynchburg is going to benefit from some of this, because if you see on here, if you look on there for the smart scale chart that was up, Lynchburg, I think, is getting a whole lot more money than this region.
Oh, yeah.
They got lots of projects up there. And in that case, education begets revenue. I mean, road improvements, because of the great presence of Liberty University, which has been a grand slam for that area, and so forth, and the population growth they have coming out into the forest area. So anyway, here we go. It's never a dull moment in transportation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
sir.
Yeah, I'll make a few comments to Mr. Phil over here. Phil, you and I have agreed on most everything we've discussed. But when it comes to raising taxes, I am adamantly opposed to raising any more taxes up here. Our citizens have been taxed to death. And, I know we can use the money. Maybe we just need to work a little smarter, or, watch our budgets a little closer. And I see where you're coming from, but I think our citizens out here have been beat to death with taxes and more taxes. We discussed raising cigarette tax in Bonnet County. I don't agree with it because even though there would be more money, look at these people out here that are addicted to cigarette smoking. You know, I had to get a pack of cigarettes for my son one night last week, $7.25 for a stinking pack of cigarettes. When I quit smoking, they were 40 cents a pack. What is this doing to the people out there? You know, and if you raise it again, and a lot of them are not working or they're on limited income, and I know we can say, well, why don't they quit? Well, it's not that easy because I went through that. But anyway, we're still friends, but just for what it's worth, I just wanted to share that, and we don't need to debate it, okay?
No, we don't. And I wasn't suggesting we do this. I'm just saying, keep your eyes and ears out because it's a topic that could come up one day in the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, folks. That's a lot of good discussion, a lot of good information there. And obviously, we do face some challenging decisions, that's for sure. So appreciate the conversation. And Brian, we certainly appreciate all that information concerning smart scale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay. We're down to the comments from the commissioners. Anyone have anything further this afternoon?
I'm gonna, Mr. Chair, I got one more comment on the census. From what I'm reading and hearing, and I couldn't remember the source, but it was a good one. We don't believe that we're going to get the data before September 30th. So the House of Delegate elections will not have time to be redistricted this year. I was having a conversation and someone brought it up on another electoral matter, and they indicated that in 1981 and 82, there was a precedent set. And the president, for whatever reason, they weren't able to redistrict in 81 according to the law. So they had to do it in 82. So the election in 81 went forward, and election in 82 had to be those folks that won under the old redistricting had to run again in 82 for the new redistricting. So let's all pray that that's not the case when it comes to elected officials, because that would, for those on the ballot this year, would not be desirous to have to go through it again next year. But unless the General Assembly does something to address that, I'm not sure how that would work. But history in the past, and not that many years ago, set that precedent from what I was told by a government official.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Amazingly, that was even before my time. So I'm sure some of you might remember that though. But anyhow, I do appreciate that information. Any other comments? I would just like to briefly once more remind our work committee that we'll be having a meeting immediately after the commission meeting. If there's nothing further, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, you can, if we finished our business, I think according to Robert's Rules of Order, you can just adjourn the meeting now without that way you don't have to call the roll again.
Let's not call the roll again.
Oh, come on.
All right, folks. Hey, for those of you that are at home, be careful walking down the hall. The meeting is adjourned. Take care.
Thank